Alright, this is a lesson from Mr. Singleton's classes with a more in-depth look at how to structure the argument essay. This lesson should be helpful for any type of persuasive writing, whether it's the AP argument essay, the SAT persuasive essay, or really any other persuasive writing pieces. But we're going to focus mostly on how this applies to the AP English language exam and the AP argument essay. It might sound easy enough to argue on paper, and you might feel pretty confident getting ready to sit down and write, but many times that confidence doesn't last long, and student writers tend to run into a wall, and inevitably I get asked the same few questions. How many paragraphs is this supposed to be? Or how many sentences am I supposed to have? Or just simply, how long is it supposed to be? These are all valid questions that have to do with the structure of the argument essay. And believe it or not, there are a lot of different ideas out there meant to help you with that. In fact, you may remember some English teacher in your past talking about that very thing, about structure and paragraphs, and that stereotypical English teacher probably gave you stereotypical advice. You've probably been taught the traditional formula for organizing an essay. You might have heard this traditional formula called the 5-paragraph essay. This formula is really comfortable, and it makes it really easy on you because it tells you just how many paragraphs you should write, and it's usually even accompanied by a formula for each paragraph, where each paragraph has 5 sentences. It's very basic and it's very stuffy, and it goes something like this. Paragraph 1 is the introduction paragraph. Paragraph 2 is the first body paragraph. Paragraph 3 is the second body paragraph. Paragraph 4 is the third body paragraph, and at this point it's usually mentioned that this should be your strongest point to hit it home, which then leads to the fifth and final paragraph, the conclusion paragraph. On tests like the AP argument essay, many students stick with this formula and they're able to write a very average piece of writing. Usually a short opening paragraph with a thesis statement, 3 body paragraphs of evidence, and a nice neat conclusion. At this point, if you're thinking that this seems all too simple, you're right. See, the 5-paragraph essay was created by college professors, not as a revolutionary way of great writing, but simply as a way to make it faster for them to grade all the essays they had to grade. Writing in this formula creates a problem. While it was very fast and efficient for professors to be able to grade, it usually does not produce good writing. And on tests that are judging your writing, it's simply dangerous to use. This formula usually leads to boring, dry writing, and usually won't get you a score higher than a 4 or 5 out of 9 on the AP test, if that. On top of that, this formula has probably really damaged how you think about paragraphs. Thinking of paragraphs that rigidly as a formulaic 5-sentence tool can really mess up a good writer. So you need to forget that as a definition of a paragraph. The actual dictionary definition of a paragraph is that it's simply a tool for organizing and transitioning your reader from one point to the next, and it can be as short as 1 sentence. Paragraphs are a tool to organize, and you should always use paragraphs as an organizing tool in your writing. But just remember, you have a lot of creativity with how you create paragraphs. It doesn't have to be a certain amount of sentences. It can be as short as 1 sentence, and it can be very many sentences long as well. At this point, you may have another question. You may be thinking, okay, if the 5-paragraph model is bad, how am I supposed to be structuring my writing? To think about the best ways to organize and structure a piece of persuasive writing, we have to go way back. That's pretty far back, but actually we need to go even further back. Yeah. Sorry, Abe. Nice beard. We need to go all the way back to the height of the Roman Empire and hear from this guy, Cicero, one of the original masters of persuasion. This guy was so good at persuading people with his speeches and writing that we actually still use and teach his model for argument today. We call it Cicero's classical arrangement. You'll notice he doesn't talk in terms of paragraphs, but more in terms of parts. He talks about having 6 parts. I'll go through them really quickly, and hopefully it'll give you some guidelines for how you can organize your thoughts and organize your writing when writing that argument essay. He called the first part the exordium. The exordium works like an introduction. It often uses an ethos appeal, or it establishes the author or speaker's credibility. This is where you want to get your audience's trust and display that you know what you're talking about. Now, the exordium can be a sentence, even a phrase, or it can be multiple paragraphs depending on your purpose and depending on your audience. In a timed writing situation like on the AP test, you can usually get the exordium done very quickly and not using very many sentences. Part 2 is the Narratio. This part is known as the narration. Generally, it explains the problem. It gives a little bit of the background information. It describes the history of the issue or gives different sides of a debate. Basically, it lays out the problem or the argument. Again, this can be a sentence, a phrase, or even multiple paragraphs, and on the AP test, you can probably keep this section fairly short. But this is a great way to show your knowledge on the issue before you get into the meat of your argument. Which brings us to step 3. The partitio. This is known as the partition or division, and this is the point where the author or speaker states his or her claim. We would most often talk about this in terms of a thesis statement. At this point, you've given the background information, you've set up what the history is of this debate, and you are laying out what your voice in this debate is, what you are saying, and what you're adding to the debate. Again, can be a sentence, a phrase, multiple paragraphs, but that partitio is best working like a thesis statement. One clear, specific sentence that says where you're going. Part 4 is the Conformatio, or confirmation or proof. We would talk about this as the point where you bring evidence in to support your argument. This is where you'll spend the bulk of your time writing and making your argument. This is where you would want to organize your body, and you would want to bring in all the specific evidence that you're going to use to support the claim you made in the partitio. Usually this is going to be the most extensive part. You're probably going to write a little more for this. And this is where you want to bring in, on things like the AP argument essay, you want to bring in a lot of specific examples. Multiple personal experiences you've had that display that, things you've observed, readings you've done. That's where you want to bring it in. Which brings us to part number 5, the Refutatio, meaning refutation, or we might talk about this in terms of addressing the counter argument. Okay, this is your opportunity as a writer or speaker to respond to any of the claims held by those having an opposing or critical view to you. You know where the weaknesses might be in your argument and what you're saying, and this is your opportunity to head those things off and to defend against or explain away the problems or questions that might be raised against you. On tests like the AP test, on the argument essay, the essays that get into those higher scores almost always do this. So it's an important piece to have. That brings us to our 6th and final step, known as the Parra Ratio. This is similar to what we would call a conclusion, but I don't want to call it a conclusion because it's not exactly the same. It is a time where the author or speaker sums up their main points or sums up their argument, but beyond that, it usually concludes with an appeal to pathos or emotion. It's the speaker's last effort to win the audience and subtly appeal to that emotional side of them in an effort to persuade. Again, there's no set amount of sentences or length to this section. It depends on your purpose, your audience, and your timing. You can accomplish this in 1 or 2 sentences or in multiple paragraphs. Obviously on the AP test, you're tight for time, so you can afford to have this section a little shorter. That is Cicero's 6-point oration. It's not the only way to think about and organize and structure a piece of argumentative writing, but I think we have to admit it's a pretty good way. So, next time you sit down to write an argument essay or a piece of persuasive writing, hopefully you can avoid thinking about how many paragraphs and how long and how many sentences, and think more in terms of Cicero's 6-part oration. thinking more about how you can organize and use paragraphs to have the best effect on your audience and not just have 5 paragraphs with 5 sentences each. Hopefully it'll help you have some success. You can give a thumbs up to Cicero's genius, and you can create a well-written, persuasive speech or writing. Good luck trying it out.